Trade talks between the UK and the EU resume today in a tense atmosphere following Britain's proposed overriding of the withdrawal agreement that had previously been ratified with Brussels. The legislation, if it's passed in Westminster, would remove the EU's power to impose checks and tariffs in Northern Ireland in the event of a no deal, giving that power instead to the British government. Experts, as well as the UK's Northern Ireland Secretary, admitted that a move would break international law. The EU warned Britain to abide by its word, while the Irish Prime Minister said that trust in the UK has been eroded. Well, let's head to Brussels to find out a little bit more about the EU's perspective, to speak to our correspondent, Shona Murray, who's there for us. Shona, morning. How has this gone down in Brussels? I gave a little hint of it there. I think it'd be fair to say not very well.
No, it's gone down very badly, Rosie. In fact, senior sources related to the trade and to Brexit have said to me they can't see how any trade deal can be completed with the UK now because trust has gotten to such a low point. But I'm joined now by Saj Karim, who's a former British MEP for the Tory party, but also based in Brussels. Saj, where does this lead us all now?
Well, of course, today the European Union is seeking clarification from the British government, and a meeting is going to take place in London. We will very much have to see what specific issues the EU is seeking clarification on. I think it's quite obvious based upon the text that has been received so far as the bill is concerned. And we will just have to wait and see what Michael Gove actually says in that meeting. Is that sufficient to box this off into a very narrow field where we can see how this bill progresses through the British Parliament? Do we have sufficient time for that? Or do we find ourselves in a situation at the end of today that the European Union comes out of that meeting with a conclusion that, I'm sorry, this just can't go any further?
And when you say can't go any further, you're talking about the progression of relations. But from a legal point of view, and you're a lawyer, what can Brussels do about this breach of literally international law, the withdrawal agreement? And even though it's a narrow issue, it's not really, it's very consequential because it deals with the Irish border.
Well, of course, the withdrawal agreement comes within the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. So that is the very obvious avenue that is available to the European Union, should they wish to pursue that. What I would say, however, is this, that I do not see a circumstance in which this bill progresses through the British Parliament and actually finds itself in a final landing place in which the United Kingdom is not adhering to the rule of law and fulfilling all of our legal obligations, including our international law legal obligations. So that process is very much one that we should all be watching very closely.
One thing we're talking about is whether it's going to get passed. Now, you're a former lawmaker. If you were a Tory party backbencher, how would you vote?
Well, I could not support the government on a move to try and get a bill made into an act that takes us away from our duties under obligations of an international treaty and international law. That's an absolute non-starter because, and the thing is that there is sufficient anger about this in the United Kingdom itself and in Parliament. People just simply are taking the view that if today the United Kingdom is going to walk away from its international obligations that this government signed up to only months ago with its eyes wide open, then where does that leave us? The very fabric of our society is built upon the rule of law. What happens next? And therefore people are not willing to just allow their members of Parliament to deal with this in the way that it was dealt with before, i.e. the will of the people. There is a very real difference between what has happened before with some very brave and ambitious measures that have been taken by this particular government as compared to where we are today.
Just in a word, would you implore your Tory colleagues to vote against this bill in the Tory party?
I absolutely implore them to amend this particular bill so that it is in compliance with our duties to the international community and then pass it.
Saj Karim, thank you very much for joining us. And back to you in studio, Rosie.
Shona, thank you very much, speaking to us there from Brussels. Now, the Tory party that we've been talking about, of course, the Prime Minister's Conservative Party. Let's get the view from London. Our correspondent Tig Enright is on the scene for us. Tig, morning to you. So the bill that the UK government are proposing, how likely is it? I know we just had the perspective there from Brussels, but how likely is it that it would actually be passed into law?
I think there is opposition mounting, particularly from within the Conservative Party, as the last guest was acknowledging there. It's going to be debated in Parliament today on its second reading. It's already, of course, had a frosty reception from opposition MPs, although Labour taking more of a cool anger approach rather than hot outrage. But the Scottish National Party, which is the third biggest party in Parliament, talking about Britain at risk of becoming a rogue state. But the real question is how many of Boris Johnson's own Conservative MPs do voice disquiet about it. Many of them have been shocked that the government would be so brazen as to threaten breaking international law, and some have already warned that they cannot support it. Put simply, I will not vote to break the law, said one of them. But how many people are there like that? Keep in mind that Boris Johnson, after his stonking election performance last December, has a majority of 80 in that parliament there, so it will require a significant number of dissenters to get in the way of this law. But as Saj Kareen was pointing out there is also the prospect to amend the bill, and Labour is already talking about tabling amendments, and indeed that option is open to any MP to table an amendment. That is another opportunity for government MPs to voice their disquiet if they support some of those amendments, or indeed to change this bill fundamentally so that hopefully it is not in breach of international law. Back to you now, Rosie.
Tig, thank you very much. Our correspondent there in London.